Leave me alone, Jide. I am a graduate now. I can't settle for less.
Let me tell you how Jidenna got himself at this point. He was a cool young businessman in the village of Umofia. The morning sun had barely risen over Umofia, and already the market hummed with life. The scent of roasted yam mixed with fresh kola nuts, and the clatter of metal from Jidenna's spare parts stall filled the air. Jidenna was already at his post, wiping his hands on an old rag streaked with engine oil, eyes scanning the bustling crowd for customers. He had been up since 4, counting the day's earnings in his worn notebook, and yet there was a lightness in his chest that made the early hours worth it. Today, like every day for the last 4 years, he had one goal beyond selling brake pads, shock absorbers, and gearboxes. He was building a future for Kosiso. Kosiso, the girl from the neighborhood, brilliant and bright, with eyes like polished onyx and a smile that could soften the hardest of hearts. She had been brilliant even when her family's poverty made textbooks a luxury. Jidenna had met her at a village church event, and from the moment he had known she was the special one. He had fallen in love, yes, but Jidenna was not the type to marry a girl without giving her the world he thought she deserved. Obim, I want my wife to be a graduate, he had told her one evening, his rough hands holding hers, so that people will respect her, so that no one can ever doubt her worth or yours. Kosiso had laughed at first, shaking her head. Jidenna, you're dreaming. Who in our village has money for that? Then I will work, he had said simply, shrugging off the impossible. Everything I earn, I give to you, even if it takes me 40 years. Your future is my priority. And he had kept that vow. Every evening for 4 years, while other men bought new cars and built new houses, Jidenna saved every kobo for Kosiso. Every profit, every little windfall from his booming spare parts business went straight into Kosiso tuition fees, her hostel rent, her iPhone, and even the expensive human hair weaves that she adored. The villagers shook their heads at first. See, Jidenna, one of his friends had said, scratching his balding head as he leaned on a crate of spark plugs. Why are you wasting money on that girl? She might leave you for a city big man. Jidenna only smiled, wiping grease from his hands. No, he said softly, I am not buying her love. I am watering the seed of her life. Whatever grows from it, I will be proud. He knew that money could never buy affection, but he could give her the tools to reach the life she deserved. That, he thought, was love. It was the morning of Kosiso's matriculation day, and the village buzzed with excitement. Obim, you are my king, Kosiso said that day, wrapping her hands around his rough, oil-stained hands. Her eyes glistened with tears as she whispered the words that would stay with him forever. No matter how many big men I see, you are the one who watered the seed of my life. Jidenna smiled, his chest swelling with pride. He had expected her to be radiant, but seeing her in her cap and gown, glowing with accomplishment, made him feel like he had climbed Mount Everest barefoot. Those 4 years had not been easy. Jidenna had denied himself even the smallest luxuries. Yet he never complained. Every time he saw Kosiso smiling on a video call from her hostel, studying late into the night, he felt his sacrifices multiply into something far greater than himself. By the time Kosiso reached her final year at the university, the transformation was impossible to ignore. Gone was the village girl who had struggled to buy a single textbook. In her place was a young woman who seemed to float through the corridors of academia with confidence, carrying herself like someone who already belonged to a world far larger than the small village from which she came. Her gowns were carefully pressed, her hair always immaculate, her heels clicking with authority on the polished floors. She had joined the circle of the Slay Queens, girls who treated the campus like a runway, who frequented high-end lounges, and whose phones never seemed to leave their manicured hands. Kosiso fit in perfectly. It wasn't just her beauty. It was the intelligence and poise she had honed over the years, sharpened like a blade by the world she now navigated. And then came ENGR. Dave. Dave was everything Jidenna was not. Smooth, polished, and dripping with city confidence. He drove a Range Rover that gleamed under the Nigerian sun like a trophy. He talked in measured sentences, quoting trends from international markets, name-dropping contractors, politicians, and people Kosiso had only read about in textbooks. He made her laugh. He made her feel sophisticated. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he made her feel that her world with Jidenna, the village trader with oil-stained hands, was small, limited, and insufficient. Tea began subtly. One Friday evening, Kosiso was invited by a classmate to a high-end lounge by the river. The city lights reflected on the water like shards of crystal, and the hum of expensive cars and soft jazz set the mood. Kosiso arrived first, feeling an unfamiliar thrill. She was wearing a white silk dress that hugged her in all the right places, her hair flowing like a river of midnight silk. Dave appeared 10 minutes later, in his tailored navy blue suit, his smile polished and practiced. He approached her confidently. "Kosiso," he said, leaning down slightly, "you are far too sophisticated to spend time with someone less aligned with the world we live in." Kosiso laughed nervously, feeling a small pang of guilt. "Less aligned?" she asked, taking a sip of her cocktail. "I mean no offense," Dave said smoothly, "but your boyfriend, he's a nice man, I hear, but he's too local. And you are not village anymore. You're destined for bigger things. For a classical babe like you, he is way too local for you. You are way out of his level." Kosiso's heart thumped. She tried to dismiss it, told herself it was the city making her insecure. But somewhere deep inside, Dave's words lit a spark. A dangerous spark. Meanwhile, back in Umofia, Jidenna continued his quiet, patient routine. Every day, he sold spare parts, counted profits, and saved. He had continued to believe in Kosiso with every fiber of his being. He imagined her graduating,
Leave me alone, Jide.
walking toward him
I am
with
a
that
graduate
same
now.
glow she had
I
always
can't
carried.
settle for less.
And then, together, they would start their life. He had no idea that life was shifting under his feet like quicksand. On the day of Kosiso's graduation, Jidenna traveled 6 hours, carrying a cooler of village-cooked delicacies, a small gold-plated watch, and his heart full of hope and pride. When he arrived, the grandeur of the university campus stunned him. Marble floors, glass panels, and parents in designer outfits. He clutched his watch tightly, feeling out of place in his simple shirt and trousers. But that didn't matter. Kosiso was his. That was enough. He spotted her from across the hall. She was talking and laughing, her laughter ringing like a bell. And beside her there was Dave. Yen-gr. Dave, leaning casually, arm around her shoulder, a confident smirk on his face. Jidenna froze for a moment, heart hammering. He blinked, thinking perhaps he had imagined it. But no, it was real. He swallowed hard, pushing the lump in his throat down. He walked toward her, cooler in hand, his rough hands trembling slightly, not from fatigue, but from the fear of what he might encounter. "Kosiso," he called softly. She turned, and in that moment, the air between them seemed to thicken. Jidenna saw something in her eyes he hadn't expected: distance, coldness. "Jidenna, please," she said, stepping back as he moved closer. "Don't embarrass me in front of my colleagues. This is what I get." "Kosiso," he said gently, reaching out. I'm here for you. I'm proud of you. Let me hug you." She shook her head, the coldness in her gaze sharpening. "Jidenna, I think we need to be realistic." Her words were soft, polite, but lethal. "Realistic?" he echoed, confusion clouding his voice. "We built this together. For years. I sacrificed for you. Every kobo, every day, every moment of the past 4 years." Kosiso took a deep breath. She looked around at the well-dressed graduates, the polished floors, the shining cars, and then back at him. "I am a first-class graduate now," she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. "I have a world of opportunities. And you are just a village trader. You can't match up with global trends. I cannot settle for less. To be honest, I am out of league." Jidenna's stomach turned. He wanted to laugh, to cry, to beg, but his pride anchored him. "Out of my league," he repeated, his voice low, but each word trembled with disbelief. "Kosiso, I built the foundation you're standing on. I put you through school. I gave you the tools to reach this place. And now you say I'm less?" She nodded, her eyes avoiding his, looking instead at the polished auditorium around them as though it justified her decision. "I am sorry, Jidenna. This is the reality. Eve grown. You stayed the same. The weight of her words sank into him, dragging him into a pit of sorrow. And yet, amid the despair, a strange clarity began to emerge. He realized with painful precision that love alone did not guarantee loyalty, that sacrifice could be met with ingratitude, and that people could change in ways that left your heart behind. He lowered his hands slowly, letting them fall to his sides, the cooler of food forgotten. "I see," he said, his voice calm but cold. "I see, Kosiso. You are no longer the girl I knew. And I am still the man I was." She looked at him then, perhaps expecting anger, perhaps expecting tears. But Jidenna's eyes held nothing but quiet resolve. For a moment he let himself mourn, not for her, but for the version of their love that had been real, pure, and unbroken. She spoke again with him, hoping to justify her choices, to soothe her conscience. "Jidenna, let's be honest. Everything has changed. Everything." Jidenna's voice was calm, measured, but each syllable cut like steel. "Kosiso, tell me about the 4 years I gave you. The sleepless nights I endured, the meals I skipped, the sacrifices, the love. What is that to you now?" She laughed softly, a sound that once had warmed his heart, but now felt like sandpaper. "Consider a charity, Jide," she said lightly, brushing off the gravity of his words. "Or maybe a consultancy fee for the time I spent with you. Don't worry. I'll write you a check of 500,000 naira. That should keep your business running. Just stay in your lane." The words landed like stones in his chest, but Jidenna did not raise his voice. He did not beg. He only nodded once, slowly, with the quiet dignity that had always defined him. "I understand," he said. "I will stay in my lane." And with that he turned. Every step away from her was heavy, yet deliberate. With each step he shed the weight of 4 years of heartbreak, carrying only the lessons and the fire that had begun to kindle in his soul. By the time Jidenna walked out of that auditorium, night had fallen over the campus. The lights of the city sparkled, indifferent to the heartache of a man who had given everything and received nothing in return. But in his chest, a small flame burned, not for revenge, not for spite, but for a promise to himself. For a week, he wandered the village streets, thinking through every lesson he had learned from 4 years of running his spare parts shop. Every supplier he had dealt with, every customer negotiation, every penny saved, it all mattered. He realized that selling brake pads and gearboxes in Umofia was good, but importing them, that was better. That was the path to influence, scale, and the respect that Kosiso had sought elsewhere. "If she wanted the world," he muttered to himself one evening, counting the day's earnings under the dim glow of a kerosene lamp, "then I will build a world she cannot imagine, a world she cannot touch." He leaned back in his chair, hands resting on the ledger. The night was quiet outside, the city humming softly in the distance. Jidenna smiled faintly, a small, determined curve of the lips. "Out of my league," he whispered to himself. "Very well. I will redefine the league." Jidenna sold his old motorcycle, borrowed from a trusted friend, and pooled every coin he had left. The city was intimidating. The streets pulsed with traffic, the sky was choked with dust, and the air smelled of ambition and exhaust fumes. But to Jidenna, it smelled like opportunity. He rented a small warehouse in the city, just off the river road, and began importing automotive parts in bulk. At first, the capital was tiny. 1 shipment, 2 shipments, often waiting for weeks before the goods sold. But Jidenna had patience, and more than that, he had an eye for quality. While other traders chased quick profit, Jidenna focused on relationships, trustworthy suppliers, timely deliveries, and products that worked. It was not glamorous. He worked 12-hour days, sleeping in the back of the warehouse when shipments came late. He negotiated, bargained, and sometimes argued until his throat was hoarse. But every setback was a lesson, every challenge a stepping stone. By the 2nd year, his reputation began to grow. Mechanics from Onitsha to Lagos sought partner with him, praising their durability and his honesty. Where others overcharged or sold subpar goods, Jidenna was reliable. His warehouse became a hub, a place where small garages and big contractors alike could trust that their orders would arrive on time. "Jide," his manager said one afternoon, handing him a notebook filled with orders. You're building something bigger than any spare parts shop. People are calling you the market giant. Jidenna smiled, brushing his hands against the grease from earlier inspections. It's not enough, he said. We are just getting started. The small warehouse had grown into a fully fledged import-export operation. Jidenna incorporated the business as Jide Logistics, specializing in automotive machinery and spare parts. The modest Onitsha warehouse became a bustling hub with cranes, forklifts, and trucks lining the yard. He hired staff, people who shared his work ethic and vision, and trained them to think like owners. He wore clean clothes now, sharp and custom-made, and spoke with the confidence of a man who understood both the market and human nature. When he entered a room, people listened. Not because of his wealth alone, but because of the authority he carried, the kind that comes from building something from scratch, from being tested by fire and pain, and refusing to be defeated. And yet, despite his new world of success, Jidenna did not forget. Kosiso's rejection, the humiliation, the out-of-my-league words, they were still lodged deep in his chest. But he had turned them into something powerful. Not bitterness, but fuel. I will never be taken for granted again, he said one evening to his secretary, a young woman named Ifeoma, who had joined him from the early days. Those who think loyalty and sacrifice can be discarded, they will learn. Ifeoma smiled knowingly. She had seen the transformation firsthand. You've grown, sir. Bigger than any hurt. Jidenna nodded, eyes focused on the skyline from his office window. Bigger than any hurt, he repeated, letting the words settle into his bones. Meanwhile, Kosiso was living in her own carefully curated world. Dave had taken her in, impressing her with designer clothes, luxury cars, and promises of big contracts. She had assumed that Jidenna's world was small, and that her decision to leave him had been the right one. But life in the fast lane has a way of testing even the brightest stars. Dave, despite his polished appearance, was reckless. Contracts fell through, deals collapsed, and the debts began to mount. Kosiso tried to maintain her composure, but the cracks were showing. She had heard rumors of a meeting, a crucial government contract that could save them. And the man who could help? Jidenna. 3 years after that devastating graduation day, Jidenna had built an empire. Jide Logistics was the largest importer of automotive machinery in West Africa. His name carried weight in boardrooms and government offices alike. And yet he remained the same at heart. Honest, disciplined, and guided by principles that could not be bought. He had learned the most important lesson from Kosiso's rejection. People may define leagues by appearances, but real power is built with sweat, intelligence, and integrity. It was on a humid Wednesday morning when the call came. The voice on the line trembled slightly, Dave's voice. Chairman, please, my company, we can deliver. If you sign this partnership, if you approve this deal. Jidenna sat back in his office chair, polished mahogany under his hands. He said nothing for a long moment, listening as Dave explained the desperation. Kosiso was in the background, her voice quiet, anxious. Bring them to my office, he said finally. I want to see the two of you. The man who had laughed at him, dismissed him, called him village, was about to walk into the very office he now owned to plead for salvation. The morning air was thick and humid, carrying the faint scent of exhaust fumes and salt from the nearby lagoon. Kosiso stared out of the Range Rover window, her hands clenched so tightly on the leather that her knuckles whitened. Yenjiar. Dave, ever the smooth talker, kept glancing nervously at the GPS, muttering about traffic and appointments. Kosiso, Dave said, his voice tight. Remember, this meeting is everything. If Jide Logistics signs this partnership, we're back on top. This is the only way we can save the company. Kosiso nodded, swallowing hard. She had spent the last 3 years basking in the illusion of power. Designer clothes, luxury apartments, expensive lunches, and the admiration of peers who had once seemed untouchable. But all of that had crumbled. Contracts had failed, debts piled up, and the government project that Dave had so confidently secured was slipping through their fingers. And now the man who had quietly supported her entire life, the man she had cast aside as village, was the one who held the keys to their survival. He's the chairman of Jide Logistics, Dave continued, nervously adjusting his tie. I've secured the meeting. You have to impress him. Make sure he believes in us. Kosiso forced a nod, but deep down, panic gnawed at her. How could she impress the man who had once been nothing in her eyes, but whose empire now eclipsed everything she thought she deserved? When they arrived at the towering glass building, Kosiso's heart pounded. She adjusted her blazer, straightened her skirt, and took a deep breath. Dave led the way, confidence still masking desperation. The elevators glided upward silently, and Kosiso stared at her reflection in the polished steel walls. For the first time, she felt small. The massive doors of the penthouse office opened, revealing an interior of opulence. Polished marble floors, art-lined walls, and a panoramic view of Lagos stretching endlessly beyond the windows. The air smelled faintly of rich leather and cedar. And then the chair behind the massive desk swiveled slowly. Jidenna, the same rough, oil-stained hands she had once held had been transformed into the hands of a man commanding billions. His bespoke suit fit perfectly. His posture was impeccable. He looked at her, eyes calm but piercing, as though he could see every fear, every regret she carried inside her. Kosiso froze. She had imagined this moment countless times, but never like this. Never with him looking every inch the giant she had once laughed at. Chairman, Dave said quickly, stepping forward, voice trembling slightly. Please, our company, we're at your mercy. We need your approval for this contract. Jidenna did not respond. His eyes remained fixed on Kosiso. The silence stretched, tense and suffocating. I heard you're a first-class graduate, he said finally. His voice calm, measured, but cutting through the air like steel. Can you explain the global trends of why your husband's company is failing? Kosiso's lips parted slightly. Jidenna, I didn't know, she whispered, almost inaudibly. That's the problem, Jidenna said, leaning back slightly in his chair. You thought my league was defined by my oil-stained hands, forgetting that those hands were what built your foundation. You told me I was less. Now look at your more. He's begging the less man for bread. Kosiso's face drained of color. Every word hit like a hammer to her chest. She had believed that leaving Jidenna for the allure of city sophistication had been the right choice. She had believed that Dave's smooth talk and fancy car were proof of her new status. But here she was, pleading with the man she had once humiliated, and the power dynamic had shifted entirely. Dave stammered, shifting uncomfortably. Chairman, please Enough, Jidenna said, his tone cutting, leaving no room for argument. He turned slightly, signaling to his secretary, Ifeoma, who had been silently observing. Give them 500,000 naira. Tell them it's a consultancy fee for the lesson she taught me 3 years ago. Now show them out of my league. Ifeoma stepped forward, placing a neatly stacked envelope on the desk. Dave snatched it, glancing at Kosiso, who could barely meet Jidenna's eyes. 500,000 naira? Kosiso whispered, disbelief and humiliation tangled in her voice. Yes, Jidenna said calmly. A fraction of what I invested, but enough to remind you of who built the foundation. Lessons cost money, Kosiso. But more than that, they cost perspective. Kosiso wanted to speak, to apologize, to beg, but the words caught in her throat. She realized in that moment that all the pride and sophistication she had chased were empty without integrity, loyalty, and vision. The man she had discarded, the village trader, was now the man whose decisions dictated the fate of her life. Jidenna did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. He simply returned to his paperwork, signing contracts, issuing instructions, and living in the authority he had earned. Kosiso felt the weight of her mistake settle over her like a heavy fog. As they were escorted out, Kosiso's eyes met Jidenna's one last time. There was no anger in him, no malice, only the calm assurance of a man who had turned heartbreak into power. She felt a pang of regret, deeper than anything she had felt before. This was not just about money. It was about the recognition of her own misjudgment, the understanding that she had valued appearances over substance, status over loyalty, and fleeting glamour over enduring commitment. Dave muttered under his breath, "We'll recover somehow." But Kosiso knew better. They had underestimated Jidenna, just as she had. Outside, the Lagos skyline glittered, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding below. Kosiso glanced at the city, realizing that wealth and sophistication were meaningless without vision, character, and the work ethic that Jidenna had embodied. She had sought the higher league, but the league she had dismissed was now untouchable. Jidenna returned to his desk, picking up his phone to call his new fiancée, a woman who loved him for his heart, not for his bank account. He smiled faintly, the weight of the past 3 years finally lifting. The lessons of heartbreak, rejection, and betrayal had forged him into someone unstoppable.